Hi, class. So you might have just finished watching about the Peloponnesian War, which was the war between Athens and Sparta. And this war is what led to the end of the Greek Empire, at least Greek city states as we know it. So the reason why is there was a guy who became known as Alexander the Great, but he started out as King Philip II of Macedonia. And Macedonia was that region north of the Greek peninsula and like Greek mainland, and they were you allies of Persia during the Persian War and then allies of Sparta during the Peloponnesian War. Well, after the Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta, the two city states just tried to control each other, and we talked about how they were super weak and lost a lot of people and a lot of money and different things. So while the fighting continued amongst them, a new empire called Macedonia was on the rise, and King Philip II begins to establish his power by conquering Greece. So, Philip is an accomplished assassin and kills off other competitors for the throne, and then he is captured by the Thebans in 369 to 367 and learns Greek military tactics. So then King Philip II was the father of Alexander the Great. And Alexander's mother was Olympias, who she dreamed of an auspicious future for the child in her womb. So Alexander the Great was destined to be great according to his mother. And here's a map of the Greek region in 363, so about 40 years after the Peloponnesian War ended. And this red region here is Macedonia. Here's the Peloponnese Peninsula with Athens right here and Sparta right here. And then the Persian Empire still doing their thing over here with different Greek city states along the border of the Persians. So Philip ends up dying, and after his death, Alexander inherited the throne at the age of 20. So he was not super young, but not old either. And Alexander learned his military tactics from Aristotle. And Aristotle is a great Greek philosopher who you may decide to research for the next part of this assignment. But Aristotle's still talked about today, and he's actually the one who opened the first school in history, the academy. And Greece ends up revolting because they no longer wanted to be ruled by the Macedonians. And then Thebes was made as an example of. So Alexander crushed Thebes' army and sold the people into slavery and burned the city to the ground. So the Greeks were too weak, and the revolt was a failure, and Alexander crushed them. So Alexander started his empire, and after capturing the Greek land, Alexander wanted all of Persia, and he started a campaign after he dealt with the Greek Revolt. So he Alexander would find himself at odds with Darius the Third. So we talked about Darius the Second during the Greco-Persian Wars. Well, now his son's the leader of the Persian Empire, and Alexander and Darius the Third go head to head with each other. So Alexander's army was small, well trained, and fiercely loyal to Alexander. So this being loyal to the general or leader is really important because if they're loyal, they're going to fight harder, they're going to fight longer, and they're going to trust you. The Persian Empire, on the other hand, it was large, that because it was large, it was disorganized and there was no common language. So if you remember, the Persian Empire captured a lot of regions, but they let these regions keep or maintain their culture. So the Persian Empire didn't have a common language, and when you're trying to fight, it helps to be able to speak the same language and things and to give orders and commands. And being large isn't always better because it leads to disorganization. So Some of Alexander's major battles was the Battle of the Grunnisis River in 334 BC. So Darius III didn't take Alexander seriously and sent a general in his place. So Darius III saw Alexander's small army and was like, "This isn't worth my time. It's a small army. They don't stand a chance against us. So I'm just going to send a general." And Alexander actually came very close to dying in this battle, but he was able to overcome his injuries and became victorious. So you see Darius III's making some of the same mistakes as his dad of being too cocky and not taking the enemy seriously. So then a year later, there was the Battle of Issus in 333 BC, and Darius III was now angry and he confronted Alexander in the battle, but he still doesn't take Alexander that seriously, and he brings his family to the battle site, which is crazy. Like nowadays, you don't take your family into battle, like you're trying to protect your family and you don't want the enemies to know who your family is. And Darius ends up losing the battle and flees without his family. So he was a coward and just saw he was losing and ran off and left his family. And Alexander was able to capture the family as prisoners of war. But surprisingly, he treated them very well. So in this time, people were kind and they didn't really torture you that much. So he treated the family pretty well. And here's a map of this battle. So you can see the Persians had all these soldiers, and then the Greeks, or Alexander of Macedonia, only had these. Excuse me. So the Greeks, or Alexander and the Macedonians, end up sneaking troops around this way, breaking the line up, and some of the troops moved that way where the Alexander was able to hold them off, and this group here got separated. So he broke the lines by trying to surround them, which was the key method. So then this led to Alexander's famous conquest. So first he had a siege at Tyre where Alexander wanted to sacrifice to the gods for his victory, but the Tyrians refused to let him into the city. So they feared that he would take over the city, so they wouldn't let him in to make his sacrifices or offerings to the gods at the temple. And that angered him, so he decided to conquer the island. So Alexander was originally, Tyre was this island here, and there was a big temple to the gods, and he was going there just to make an offering to the gods to thank them. And we don't think he was intending to capture them, but the Tyrians thought he was going to capture them. So they wouldn't let him into the city, and that angered him. So then he was like, "Well, fine, I'm just going to capture you." So Alexander ends up fighting the Persians more, and he was able to take Persia and begin his empire. So one of the cities that he captured was Persepolis, which was the Persian capital, and he burnt this to the ground. And burning the capital to the ground signified the end of the Persian Empire. So then Alexander pushes into India, where his campaign turns sour. So his soldiers are starting to doubt him. They've been at war now for multiple years, and India is really far away from the other regions, as you can see from this map. So Macedonia is this region here, and India is all the way over here. So that's a long way apart. You can see that this little line equals 400 miles. So if you copy that line across there, there's probably like one, two, three, four, probably like five lines apart. So India is probably like 2,000 miles away from Macedonia. I don't know the exact amount, but just going by the scale, which is important to use, this map key here you'll need in life, and this map key you'll need because it explains what things are. But India was a far way away from Macedonia, so the soldiers were getting tired of fighting and wanted to go back home, and they was like, your empire's big enough, like, and we're not gaining anything by capturing all this land, because just like the Persians, we won't be able to control this land and things will be unorganized. So Bucephalus was actually the name of Alexander the Great's horse, and Alexander tamed the wild stallion himself. And most of you know how big horses are. They're pretty big, they're taller than humans. So the fact that he hopped on this wild animal and tamed it was a crazy feat. Whoever got the bright idea to try to ride a horse was kind of crazy. And according to the story, the horse was afraid of its own shadow. So, and Alexander realized this and made blinders for the horse. So now you see the things around the eye of the horse, like on the sides during horse races and stuff. Well, that idea came from Alexander in in the Battle of Hydaspes. It was the last battle Alexander would ever fight because supposedly his horse died in the battle, and once his horse was dead, he didn't have the will to fight anymore. And also the army revolt. So, like I said, the soldiers were tired of fighting and wanted to return home to see their family and friends. And Alexander tried to persuade the army to continue on, but the men were ready to return home. So they didn't have the same will and desire as Alexander did. They were like, we have enough land and we just want to go back to our families. This isn't worth it anymore. And so they return home, and Alexander ends up becoming sick and dying. And there's many debates on whether his death was intentional or natural. So some people say that he was poisoned, which is possible because his troops were ready to return home. Other people say he got malaria, which is a disease from mosquitoes, and mosquitoes were present in high numbers in India, and that's why he died. So we don't really know why he died. Nobody wrote down in history why Alexander died or how, because if somebody poisoned him, they aren't going to write it down because then they could get prosecuted for poisoning him. And if it was a natural cause like malaria, they didn't know about malaria at this time, so they're not going to worry about keeping medical records and things because they didn't know about this stuff. So Alexander ends up dying, and we don't know why. And but some ideas is either poison or malaria, and it was pretty common for leaders to get poisoned and killed at this time. But after he died, there was no successors for him, so he didn't have any sons to give his empire to, or even any daughters. Like, he was focused on fighting wars, so he didn't really have much of a family. And so they had to break his empire up. So you see the division of his empire in 303 BCE. So he built this empire. If you go back to here, it was around 363 that he started capturing. So it took about 60 years. Like, he lived to be pretty old to build this empire, and they broke it up to his different generals. So this orange section is Seleucus. Ptolemy got the purple section, and Antigone's got this green section. Cassander got this yellow section, and then this reddish orange section went to Lysimachus. And dividing this empire is what allows the Romans, who is this people here, to be able to come in and take over all this region. And like Byzantium becomes a key city for the Romans and different things. So the Greeks got captured by Alexander of Macedonia, and a lot of people consider Alexander to be Greek, but really he's Macedonian. But since he was studied under Aristotle, who was Greek, people feel he was Greek. And then he builds this large empire that was technically a Macedonian empire, but history kind of sees it as a Greek empire. But then when he died, they had to break his empire up. So that's the history of the very end of the Greeks and how Alexander came in. And for your assignment for this, you're going to pick a famous Greek person. So if you were pick Alexander, then you would put his picture here, and you're going to find out who that person was, what they did, where they did the things that they did, and the time period that they did. And if you click on here, it's an example of Alexander. So, like this says, you can't pick Alexander for your person, but it says like who he was. So, Alexander the Great, like, married Roxanne, who was the daughter here, and he conquered different fortresses. And then, like, who did he study with as a boy? It talks about how Alexander studied with Aristotle. And then it, yeah, won't let me erase this. And who did Alexander the Great kill? So it talks about all kinds of different who's. And then down here, it talks about the what's. So there's a links up here to the what section. So, like, when he was in Egypt, he founded Alexandria, like the city, and he fought different battles. And we know that he fought the Persians from this slide. So you'll type the what, and then when he was born in 356, and he died in 323 at the age of 33, and he got married here. And then here's the where. So, like, he died in Babylon, which was the capital of his empire. Uh, he turned back, he conquered Afghanistan. So you're going to pick a key person and write who they were, like what they did, why they were important type thing, when they did it, and where they did it. And if you need help figuring out a person, there's this link here, which takes you to 25 famous ancient Greeks. So if you're into philosophers, so philosophers are people who think, then some of the first Greek philosophers was Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Or if you're into plays, then you could pick some of the playwrights or poets, like Homer's listed on here as one of the great poets. So if you really liked reading the Odyssey and you wanted to study Homer, you could pick Homer. Or if you're interested in history, there's Herodotus and Thucydides. And if you like math and science, you could pick one of the famous Greek scientists. We've talked about Pythagoras already and the Pythagorean theorem. And then there was Hippocrates, who was the founder of medicine. And so if you want to be a doctor or nurse, you might want to study him. Or Archimedes was another mathematician and scientist. Or you may want to look at some of the political leaders like Solon or Pericles. So you pick one of these people and fill out this who, what, when, and wherefore. And if you want to, you can change out this picture here and put their picture there. And then the requirements for met and not met again are right here. In this spot right here, you're going to put the name of your person, so don't forget to do that. And if you have any questions about this assignment, then you can again post a private comment onto Google Classroom, and I'll answer it and help you the best I can. If you need a Google Meet to ask a question, then just let me know a time that works for you, and we can do that as well. If you need help reading anything, then don't forget to use Google's Read Write. But that's Alexander, and who's one of the most famous Greek people, and he's not actually Greek.